Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So this week we have Janet introducing our speaker this week. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Janet to welcome us back.
Hey everyone, welcome to our. Sorry, I'm seeing two images of myself. It's a little weird. Welcome to our very first seminar of the semester. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Laura Carruba before, but I am a big fan of science fiction, so I'm looking forward to this. Laura Carruba is a librarian specializing in electronic resources at the university libraries, and also the long-running convener of a science fiction book club, science fiction and fantasy book club, hosted at the Montgomery Floyd Public Regional Library. She's also researched and published on topics including the evolution of vampire legends and supernatural traditions in Southwest Virginia. Science fiction is of great interest to STS because it's one of those key sites where a cross-section of the public wrestles with ideas about where science and technology are heading and can vicariously experience the social and ethical implications of those possible futures through the perspective of fictional characters. So science fiction book clubs can be an arena for public debate about these issues, and from what I hear anecdotally, some of those debates can be quite heated. So we look forward to hearing Laura's insights about how to maintain respectful conversation and mediate conflict, how the book club selects books to read, and perhaps how science fiction as a genre has diversified over time in terms of authors and topics. So please welcome Laura Carruba.
And yep, just bringing up my title slide, my bona fides. I'm actually a second generation librarian. My grandmother was a reference librarian, and my mother worked many public library hats before settling in tech services. Before I started working for libraries, I was volunteering for her, putting stamps and stickers on books. I read a lot. I think librarians just generally do. I have a bunch of active library cards for the area and also in Northern Virginia to use their services, but I have exactly one book club membership, and I'm here to talk about it with y'all today. Because in 2026, the world still needs book clubs, and they're more than just a group of people talking about a book. I'm going to go through a short history of book clubs in the United States and the different kinds of book clubs and book discussion groups there are, how the one that I run, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Book Club, frequently I abbreviate it to SFF. I'm going to talk about how it started, what we do, how we do it, examples of things that we read, and various, I think of them as milestones or touch points along the way that happened with them, and different cultural and society issues that reflected in science fiction and fantasy, and why having a book club dedicated to these topics is still important. And also at the end, if you're interested in joining my group or one of the other groups in the area, because there are multiple. In researching this, I discovered a Virginia Tech grad student on Reddit trying to drum up support for a book club on a site that I had never heard of before. So it is possible to join many varieties of clubs in the area. And at the end, questions, comments, and there are also book club snacks if you're lucky enough to be here in person. Feel free to indulge yourself. And short history of the book discussion group, and also have statistics. One of the oldest book clubs in the United States is the Mattoon Women's Reading Club in Mattoon, Illinois. It was started in 1877, and they have had long gaps between meetings, but they are still meeting. It's a group of people talking about a specific book. And in the 20th century, when books became even cheaper for people to afford, there were Book of the Month Club, which is actually still going. There are also initiatives started, they're generally known as One City, One Book, but it's when a city or a community or a place like Virginia Tech decides they are going to spend time reading this one book. Virginia Tech has had them in the past. I don't think they do right now, though. There are also celebrity book clubs. Oprah Winfrey's book club, probably the most famous, started in 1996. Reese Witherspoon has a book club. There are a couple other like big name celebrity book clubs. And not only is it based on what they themselves like to read, also authors and topics that they want to give prominence. Oprah in particular started her because she wanted to uplift Black voices. There are online-only book clubs that use voice over IP through IRC chat. Now Discord is very popular for just online clubs. Social media has plenty of them. Book Talk is, I instantly recognize Book Talk, but the social media app TikTok has just entire sections of people talking about books, responding to other people's topics about books, which has then morphed into groups or clubs just promoting readership of what they like and responding to comments about books made by other people. It's harkens back to the book by mail book clubs, where you would have a book mailed to you and you would write down your responses and you would send them to someone who would then copy it and send them to everybody in the group. And there are also the almost unbook clubs where people read what they want. This is especially popular with libraries, where getting children and teens to read, where they can bring in their favorite book and kind of do a show and tell and why other people should read this book. Virginia Tech has hosted silent reading clubs where you gather in the library and you just sit together and you read whatever you want, but you do it as a community. So there have been two pretty famous surveys about how book clubs work. Book Browse, which is a book club hosting site, as well as promoting readers and readership. They did a survey in 2017 of their site participants, about 3,700 people, and about 73% that they surveyed said that they belonged to a book club. The site that was formerly known as Scribd, which is now Everand, they also did a survey of their active users. They are a book distribution site, particularly for electronic books. They had about 37% of their active users say they belong to a book club, and of the people who said that they did not currently belong to a book club, about 25% of those, about 200 people, said that they would join a book club if they offered a recommended reading list, so they weren't just free reading, I guess. The links to these can be found in the links for perusal, that they're here in person. There are also links there on Zoom. I also think it's interesting that the State Public Library Association and the National Public Library Association does not keep statistics on public library book clubs. Now, I know as somebody who hosts a book club that we do keep track of this information, but there isn't a statewide or nationwide keeping track of various book clubs. So why do we gather in book clubs? Why do we feel the need to talk about what we're reading with other people? So people go to book clubs, they look for new things to read, new people to meet, They're looking for a shared connection between not just what you're reading, but people who are reading, and multiple shared interests. Book clubs, they facilitate group learning and critical thinking skills based on what you're reading and being able to ask questions and give feedback in a supportive, non-judgmental environment. Most book clubs, they don't have any specific demographics other than adults. There are specifically teen and child ones, but I'm primarily going to be looking at adult ones here. I also found that the group's dynamic is largely based on the founding person or organization that hosts the book club. Book clubs could have fees associated with the space they use or the books that they read. A group's reading selection may be predetermined by the organization, or they may take input from their members. So this is from the Inner Lives of Book Clubs, and I just copied it wholesale because how important are these to your book club experience? And many people cited they want to be respected. They want exposure to new things that they wouldn't necessarily pick up and read. They want to hear other people talk about their experiences reading the book. They want that feeling of inclusion and belonging, and they want to have a good discussion about what they're reading. So having all of these ideas in mind, so in 2019, about midway through the year, I remember the person who was in charge of the Blacksburg Library at the time was really pushing staff to take ownership of a thing. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. And somebody pitched the idea, you could do a book club. I'm like, I'm a back-of-house librarian. I was trained as a cataloger. We just hide in the back and we put the books in the catalog. And they're like, no, you'll be good at it. And I posted about a potential meeting to discuss the idea of having a book club in July of 2019. And when the meeting came around in August, we had about 8 people come to it. And I was very surprised because at the time, neither fiction nor nonfiction book club was pulling down that membership number. So we officially started it in 2019 with A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr., which is where the famous quote on the previous slide comes from, pound pastrami, canned kraut, 6 bagels, bring home for Emma. It is one of my favorite books and is also about librarians surviving the apocalypse and how they preserve information after the apocalypse. So it was a very special book for me. As of this month, January 2026, we've read 68 titles by 64 different authors. We have had several authors that were so good, we've read 2 of their books. We average about 7 people a meeting. When we read Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, this was February 2023, I believe. The date fell off the slide. We had 14 people come to book club. We had 3 people in particular who had never attended the sci-fi fantasy book club before, and 1 person who had never been to any book club before come to that meeting just to talk about that book. I'm lucky enough that the Blacksburg Library buys print editions and electronic editions of the books that we read, and the Friends of the Library buy our snacks. And I used to think that I was very special that the Friends bought our snacks, but if your program does well enough, that's what the Friends do. So I think that is a good sign for us. We are one of 3 evening book clubs that are hosted by the Montgomery-Floyd Regional Library System. And just this past week, because of the weather, we briefly went online, and during COVID, we also had some online sessions. So we were able to hold our momentum even when the physical library was closed. So our book club, we have some guiding principles that some of them we developed as a group, some of them are a part of my responsibility as a library staff person. I believe it was important that people who attend book club get a say in what we read, as not all of the clubs in the area and not all the clubs in the library, some of the books are just decided in advance. And I felt like if you wanted to come and you had a book that you absolutely loved, that you should be able to suggest it. And if you can convince the group that we should be reading this, we should be reading this. It was also important to me that we have a diverse selection of authors as well as content. We've read Hugo and Nebula Award winners. Hugo winners are fan-selected works from like the largest sci-fi convention in the US. The Nebula Awards are publisher awards. We've read, I think the oldest that we've read is the 1920s, up to things that had just come out when we read them. And we've had a variety of genders, races, backgrounds, traditional publishing, non-traditional publishing, just to introduce people to new ideas and also the classics. Like, why did this win the awards that it won? Why is this considered a classic? Every month we try to switch off between science fiction and fantasy fiction. Sometimes the lines get blurred, and I'll talk about the concept of speculative fiction a little bit later. If we are reading something particularly spooky, I like to put it in October. If we're reading things that are more humorous, I tend to put those near November and December. So give people a break from the holiday season to come and just talk about like a Terry Pratchett, for example, because Terry Pratchett is going to be another one of our two-timers, and we are reading both of his in December. It's also important to me that everybody gets a chance to talk. And this will also come up later, that something the Inner Lives of Book Clubs reported about is that there tends to be dominant personalities, that they tend to dominate the room, talk over people, not necessarily on purpose. But I see it as my job to make sure that everybody gets a chance to say something about the book. And that's usually how we start off our sessions, is just going around, introducing ourselves, and just talking about the book at hand. I also believe that you don't have to finish the book to come to book club. You don't even have to start the book to come to book club. And some book clubs have very strict rules, like you have to finish the book. Like, you can't not come if you have not. And like, I don't believe in that. Like, there are life things that happen. Sometimes you start a book and you're like, I don't want to finish this. This is a bad book. But I want to go to book club and talk about why I think it's bad, respectfully. And I think that's a valid opinion that people should be able to share. It's also important to me as a librarian that the format of the books that we read need to be accessible in whatever format people need them to be in. So currently we have print and audio available, as well as electronic print and electronic audio. And we have people who make use of all four types. Though our physical audio person is no longer as much of a regular, so we're relying on electronic audio to fill the gap. And there are 2 or 3 members who only listen to their books. And last, we also have a short list of what I consider to be the banned authors. It's authors that have behaved so atrociously that I have either had people say, I will no longer come to your book club if you're reading one of these authors, or ones that other club members, as well as myself, find personally reprehensible, and just agreed that we are not going to read books by these people. But that is about a 5 or 6 author list out of the thousands of authors that are out there. So we do not have a lack of books to pull from. Right. And SFF Book Club, the attendance, it's a mix of demographics. Most people, they're either in the process of earning a degree, or they have 1 degree, multiple degrees. We have a couple doctorates who are coming to book club. We have people who are local. We've had people come as far away as Princeton, West Virginia. We have a current attendee who comes from Craig County, all just to come to book club. We've got people who are print only. They want a physical copy of the book that they can enjoy. We have people who read on Kindles and tablets. We have people who want the audiobook, and we try very hard to make sure we accommodate however people want to read. And later on, I will explain how that sometimes puts me at odds with library management. We've had people attend because we are reading their favorite book, and sometimes they will stay on for sessions. We have people who try to come to every one, if their schedule permits. And we have people who are honest and, like, if they didn't like the book, they'll skip book club. And I totally get it. And we have team snack. It is important for me to serve snacks at book club, and there are people who they beeline for them when they come through the door, and I totally get that. One of my favorite moments of book club was when we have several spouse pairs who attend our book club, and one of the pairs, one of them comes regularly, the other one we don't see as often, and they are definitely on team snack, as am I. And one of the books that we were reading, they both came together during the start, which I'm fine for whenever anybody wants to show up during book club, but they went, the location in this book, we've been there, we have pictures. And I was like, oh wow, please share them with us. So never know what somebody will bring. We've had people bring pictures of a trip where they went to see things that were featured in a book. We've shifted schedules around, so if somebody was not going to be able to make it for a book they really wanted to read, I swapped it. And again, I hope library management will forgive me for submitting a calendar multiple times, but like, I want people to experience their book with their group, as it were. And sometimes it's a challenge to find books that are available in multiple formats that the library can actually purchase, because they have their vendors where they can buy things, and like, not every award winner is available as an audiobook. Some highly regarded books are now out of print. So it's threading the needle between, I want everybody to read this amazing book, or you have someone who comes in and it's like, we should read this little known work by this really famous author. And doing research on it, there's no audiobook. It's only been in print twice. And we've kind of developed a not so much a side group, but also, have you read this? Here's a copy of this. And we'll just trade books around if we're not reading them for official club. We also have space limitations in the library itself. Depending on how many groups want to use the library, because we try to make it available for everyone. And Book Club has unanimously agreed that the library is the place where we want to have it, because I've noticed that a bunch of clubs in the area will go to a restaurant or one of the breweries to have theirs, but Book Club likes the library. And in the beginning, when we had to be kicked out of our room, the large community room, to be in a different room in the library, when we were smaller, when we were just starting out, but we're large enough and we've been going on long enough that I'm like, we can share the community room, but you're not kicking us out of it. They can go have their meeting in the story time room and we will stay in the community room. So also the behind the scenes planning, especially around exam time, because when Newman Library fills up, they will go down the street to the Blacksburg Library and plug in wherever there's an outlet. And sometimes we can convince them to come to book club if it's meeting on that night, but most of the time they just want the Wi-Fi and the outlet, So why specifically science and fantasy fiction for a book club? And I'm going to get into the definition of speculative fiction, because many of the things that we read aren't what you would traditionally think of as science fiction or fantasy fiction. And this is a definition that I particularly liked from the Oxford Research Encyclopedia, and the link is in the handout. The term speculative fiction has 3 historically located meanings: a subgenre of science fiction that deals with human rather than technological problems, a genre distinct from and opposite to science fiction in its exclusive focus on possible futures, and a supercategory for all genres that deliberately depart from imitating consensus reality of everyday experience. Now, those are a little bit heavy, so I'm going to call on speculative fiction author Arthur C. Clarke for science fiction is something that could happen, but you usually wouldn't want it to. Fantasy is something that couldn't happen, though often you only wish that it could. And my personal working definition until I started book club was science fiction is what can be had if we had the technology, and fantasy is what can't be based on how we understand the universe. And I'm going to get into 4 books that really challenged all of those ideas that ended up being picks for our book club. Okay, so Down Below Station by C.J. Cherryh. It's commonly known as a space opera, where it's this fantastical story that's set in outer space, that there are space battles. It's what you would normally think of like Star Wars science fiction. But in this story, it's a large, like far-reaching government versus corporations that are also large and far-reaching. And they eventually go to war over resources, and it happens in space. It's an example of taking real-world issues and dropping them into a fictional universe, where you can wrap your head around the concepts without directly linking them to our reality. This was a book club pick in April of 2023. We chose it because it was an award winner. C.J. Cherryh, female science fiction author. This won in 1982, so there was the gender gap had shrunk by that point, but there was still a sizable gender gap in the 80s. It's recognized as a classic and a masterwork, and this is actually the beginning of an entire series about government versus corporations in space. Right. So this book, Shanghai Immortal, we read this in April of 2024, and it's fantasy that combines existing cultural mythology and a existing historical time period and blends them both together. So in Chinese mythology, there are vampires and animal spirits that are reflective of their culture. It's not what you would think of as the standard European vampire or the standard European ghost. And you have a young woman who is half vampire, half fox spirit, and she's navigating her way as an outcast through the Chinese concept of hell, which is a universe that is just beyond the mortal plane, the existing universe. And the existing universe is the Shanghai area in the 1920s. This was a book that was recommended highly by a book club attendee who actually purchased copies for not only book club, but the library to share them. And I'm actually going to come back to this book later as one of the kind of personal touchstones for book club. Right. Another title that we read is very famous Never Let Me Go. And this was the first Ishiguro that we read. And I call it here walking the paths of what ifs to conclusions. And without spoiling too much of it, there is a private boarding school where the students realize that the reason for their existence, it's been decided since birth, and there is a certain path that they have to walk and a certain future that they have to be prepared for. And this one in particular kind of bent the notion of traditional science fiction and fantasy because the author writes what is known as magical realism. It's realistic fiction plot setting, but with some elements that just tweak what humans know about the universe just a little bit. And the author won the Nobel in 2017 for basically a lifetime of these works. And the last one that I want to mention is actually the book that we just read this past week, J. Zachary Pike's Orconomics. We're talking about tough topics in a different environment, and in this case, it's not only tough as in like difficult to like conceptualize on your own, and also tough as just like difficult to talk about in an emotionless, detached way, because what the author proposes is how would a traditional fantasy universe like you see in the video games where the party of adventurers goes to the dungeon and they fight the monsters and take their treasure, but the socioeconomics of it, like how would it actually work? Like once the monsters lose their treasure, how do they get more? Once the adventurers get the treasure and spend it, how do they get more? And also, what if there was a universe that slowly designed themselves around the fact that adventurers got a lot of treasure from monsters? Like you would want to get shares in that treasure before it was even gotten, and you would also want to keep down the monsters that were nominally stealing that treasure and like hoarding it, holding on to it. And this title was the pick that we just had, and it was championed by one of our book club people. This is also a self-published author who won multiple awards by self-publishing and by independent bloggers. Right? So why would we need all of these titles in 2026? Like, why would we consider like these past 4 titles as something in the current environment as reading for pleasure and reading to make us think? So I brought up a few more titles that were actually on our suggestions list in past years and how they relate to the times that are actually happening right now. So the state of Virginia has multiple banned book cases that it's resolving at the public and school library level, and links to this article and the ones in the next few slides are on that handout. This is from an article in the Cardinal News. And one of the titles that appeared on this list was Todd Strasser's The Wave, which had been pulled from a library in Spotsylvania County and also a library in Botetourt County, 2 opposite ends of the state. This is a book that's frequently banned, but it's also frequently assigned. I've seen it assigned by professors here at Tech. And it's about a high school history teacher who wants to teach their class more about fascism and like how could a group of people, basically how the Nazis could have happened. How could a group of people do this? So what starts off as this highly disciplined club kind of gets out of hand as the students are reenacting in real time how exactly something like this can happen. And this was on the selection list for 2022, but was ultimately not chosen. And I'll explain later how we go through selecting titles for book club. Right? And this next title was something that was on the selection list for this year that was ultimately not chosen. And I wanted to bring up an article about how artificial intelligence, generative AI specifically, they're inventing academic papers and academic citations that just don't exist. It's the concept of phantom papers, phantom citations, and how people are doing their due diligence and they're citing them in actual journals and books, even though they don't exist. So this book, There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, brings up the idea, what if there were these otherworldly entities that didn't just erase human memories, but how humans related ideas to each other, basically memes? What if there were these trans-dimensional entities that just canceled out how we think about ideas or concepts or items relating to each other? And it's not just about like, there's a Cthulhu monster stealing Ike and Has cheeseburger, but the different things in our life that give things particular meaning to us, which it's kind of like generative AI just going, oh, we'll just put these words in an order that we think sounds okay, but it doesn't understand the human ideas and the beliefs that humans are giving these concepts to make them relatable to other humans. And this slide is kind of a personal one for me, and the article is also a personal one for me. When Black people are in pain, white people just join book clubs. And the author in particular, Samuel R. Delany, this is one of his, it's considered a masterwork, but it's also one of his forgotten masterworks because it doesn't stand out above the others. But I think it does because it's a space opera. It's about a pilot from a powerful family and they're battling members of another powerful, politically connected family over control of spaceship fuel. And that means a lot to the pilot because he flies spaceships for a living. But you have to keep in mind, this is written by a Black author, a gay Black author. And it was published in 1968, even though it was written in the mid-60s. Now, back in the 60s, if you wanted guaranteed sales of your book, you would get them published in serialized in one of the magazines at the time, like Analog. I think Asimov came a little bit later. There was Fantastic. But he was trying to get this serialized in Analog, and his agent spoke with the editor, and the editor ultimately decided not to serialize it because he felt that the audience couldn't relate to a Black main character. And while Book Club hasn't read this one, Book Club has read Babel 17 by Delaney, which is also a really great book. This is also a space where Book Club is a space where we can discuss ideas like this too, not just about technology, but about society. And our book club in particular has talked about these sticky ideas before. Right? And in a completely opposite direction, it's the idea of traditional wives or trad wives and how they create these picture-perfect lives for themselves on social media, particularly Instagram and TikTok, and why some of these trad wives are just abandoning their social media accounts because they don't want to give the idea that they are like these incredibly perfect people. They have the perfect families, husband, children. Bringing up a book called The Echo Wife, which is another speculative fiction title, because the author usually doesn't go that far into science fiction, but what if a geneticist's husband secretly creates a clone of her that is a more perfect version of her, a less forthright, more physically pretty version of her, and then the husband ends up dead, and the wife finds out about the clone. And this is the kind of book that it falls into speculative fiction because of the genetic science and the cloning technology, but it also captures readers that don't necessarily think of themselves as traditional sci-fi and fantasy fans. And this was another book that was on the suggestion list for 2026 that was ultimately not chosen. And I do want to bring up Orconomics again because when I was creating the slide deck, I thought that I was presenting a week earlier, and it's like, oh, this will be relevant if people want to attend book club, but we had just read it. Good news is there are plenty of copies at the library to borrow in case you want to read this fabulous book. So if you're interested in technology and how current technology would relate to Orconomics, the idea that there's a company creating computer parts for data centers that do not yet exist with funding that isn't entirely there for profit that may or may not happen, but the entire market of people who currently want to use these parts is locked down for the possibility of this future money-making enterprise, you'll find a lot too that you can relate to in Orconomics, just put it that way. And last but not least in this series is one of my absolute favorite books, and an article from the National Institute of Health on how people are increasingly bored in the digital age because there are just so many distractions, so many things. And the Phantom Tollbooth starts off with a bored child who has all the toys in the world who just want something interesting to happen. And they receive a wind-up car and a toll booth. And driving through this toll booth, they wind up in this fantasy kingdom, and he soon becomes invested in what's going on and the people involved, and he goes on a amazing adventure. I have copies of books that I keep on hand, and if people say that they haven't read it, I just dig one up and give it to them, and this is one of the books. Actually, over winter break, I found yet another copy of Phantom Tollbooth. So in case you ever want to read this, I've got copies. This was on the list for 2020 and was ultimately not chosen either. So we've talked about why book club is necessary and why science fiction and fantasy are certainly still relevant. So why a book club that is dedicated to both science fiction and fantasy? And something that I didn't really get into before is that genre fiction book clubs are highly uncommon. Bookclubs.com has thousands of clubs that you can join, and there are a little over 100 of them that have science fiction as a tag. More traditional book clubs, they tend to stay more towards the literary fiction because they consider sci-fi and fantasy just too lowbrow to have a good discussion about. And based on things that my coworkers have told me, we might be the only library-run sci-fi and fantasy book club in the state. Now, there are other ones that certainly exist in the state, but they're not specifically run by the library. But the reason why I started this club and still keep on with it is that it's still necessary for us to have. I feel like gain understanding of even the 9 titles that I've discussed so far. We talk about them in a relatively risk-free environment, not just the topic of the book, but also being able to just talk about the books that we like without people making fun of us or saying, oh, those are for babies, because no, they absolutely are not. And it's the nature of sci-fi and fantasy and speculative fiction as a whole that you're kind of willing to think about new ideas or take these ideas and think about them in a new way. And the fact that we have an in-person club whenever possible, it encourages people to slow down, take their time, to deliberately come to a place to enjoy this, to be around people, that atmosphere of just welcoming and belonging that we try to foster. And also, thanks to the technology, when we have an unexpected snowstorm that turns into ice, we can flip it online and still have decent attendance. And also something that I didn't think about until an attendee pointed it out to me is the fact that we're meeting at the library as opposed to a brewery or somebody's living room. It's a neutral space. It's an alcohol-free space. It's a place where you can just come in off the street and be a part of this. It doesn't feel like there's a velvet rope separating you from the people who really belong here. And I'm like, I never really thought about it that way because I've lived in libraries since I was a kid, but they're right. And even in just running the club, there are things that I've taken away from it like those ideas. One of the books that I mentioned earlier, Shanghai Immortal, that was a turning point for the club, that the discussion at certain points was not as respectful as it could have been, and the conversation happening, people weren't being respectful of each other, and it got me to take a step back and take some of the training that I learned actually through Virginia Tech to be able to more effectively lead book club and mediate disputes. And I'm thinking from that point on, like, how do I bring my particular skill set into book club? Because oftentimes we'll read a book and it'll be like someone's area of expertise, like this is how they earn their master's or their doctorate, or they've actually been to the place that's in the book, or they know a lot about this because this is their hobby. And I'm like, so what other skills can I bring as not just a librarian or a genre enthusiast, but just me here? And this is why I push Team Snack. This is why I push the library to spend that extra money to get those harder to find books. It's just, I think this will make people happy. And even though it's a little more challenging for us, it will be absolutely worth it. I also broke down and took training on how to use Microsoft Office because I was having problems sending out club reminder emails that I hope I don't have anymore now that I've taken the training, because like sending reminder emails, if nobody was receiving them, that's kind of frustrating for everybody involved. And also trying to weigh the needs of the club versus the needs of the library. The times where I have to pretend like I'm not a librarian for a moment and like use some under the table ways to get people to the book they need in the format that they need it, which may involve jailbreaking the Kobo, which is a Canadian-specific ebook reader, and also trying to straddle that line between a good librarian and I think of myself as a good book club host, and like making sure those emails get sent out, making sure that we have name tags, and if there are new people, we are introducing ourselves. Every time I have bought little plates for our book club snacks, they wander off, so that has become a line item for when I purchase snacks that get reimbursed for, because we have to have something to put the snacks on. It's the little things. It's the little things. Making sure to do the administrative tasks on my end to make sure that we're not double booked. Make sure that book club is also getting the same advertising that the other clubs are, that we're not being left out. I have only missed book club 3 times. The time that I was sick, the time that I was out of town and one of my coworkers covered, the time that I accidentally got the date switched up and another coworker covered for me, and book club met regardless. So I'm kind of proud that we have a group that can stand on its own even if I'm not there, but I appreciate being there for them. Sometimes people come to book club by mistake. Like, we've had at least 2 people come in thinking that this was for sci-fi and fantasy authors of books. And they'll stay and they'll have an enjoyable conversation and they'll email me afterwards and say, I was expecting something different. And I'm like, oh, you can join this writing group that's hosted at a different library. Because librarian nature, I want people to leave with what they came in for. the time that we were reading Picnic on Paradise in August 2021 when that big tornado was sighted outside of town. So we all retreated to the bathrooms inside, unless you were standing outside in the lobby and watching the wind blow sideways. That was the night that I gave 2 people a ride home because it started raining after that and the buses weren't running, and which involves more the needs of the club versus the needs of the library, as in, would you normally give patrons a ride home, even if they weren't book club people? Like, these have been book club people since the beginning, and I'm not going to make them walk 2 miles in the rain. At the end of the year, I've started giving book club free books as kind of a thank you for attending book club. Here's some genre books that I think that y'all might like, and we no longer have that ability, but asking a bookseller in town, they're like, yeah, sure, I'll give you a box. The book that we had for last November, we didn't have any print copies because there was a mix-up, and the same person came through for that. So it's a community that I helped build that's prospering and just growing stronger. And I hope I've done a good enough job selling it, because here are some of the groups around town and some of the things that they read. Two of these are outside of the libraries. There's Blacksburg Books, local business that has multiple book clubs, and there's also Blacksburg Newcomers, which isn't just for people new to the area, but they try to support and connect people who are coming from out of town, or they're coming to Tech to learn or to teach. And at the Montgomery Floyd Regional Library, one of my coworkers started a book club just this past month for romantic fantasy books, or romantasy, because she saw a need and wanted to give patrons what they wanted, and all the different book club heads compared notes about what works, what doesn't, take what you want, leave the rest, and we hope you're successful with it. Also some notes if you want to go to some of the other clubs in the area. In February, we're going to be reading Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, and I've had at least one person say, that's not science fiction. I was buying something at the bookstore across the street, and they said, I like Vonnegut, but I don't really think he's a sci-fi author. And I'm like, you should come to book club and tell us about it. And this should also be in the list of links on the paper, and some ideas about what's next for us. The group has said if we can connect what we're reading with movies or TV shows that we could watch beforehand, that would be great. I'm working out a deal with the bookseller to try to provide more free or low-cost copies of the books, so we won't run short on paper copies again. I'm trying to have a dual session with one of our books where we can meet at a different location in Blacksburg, maybe here at the Newman Library, and have a session, as well as the one in Blacksburg. The Blacksburg Library is going to host an author fair later this year, and we've got at least 3 published authors in book club who might want to come and just talk about their books. There's also been a digital book club through the library that's been pitched for next year, and maybe participating in that as a rotating host separate from book club, and bring a book that everybody in club liked, and it brought a lively discussion. And all right, I'm just hitting the hour mark. So, any questions?
yeah, if anybody has questions.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say, so I'm working on a history of the Magic School Bus, and it cuts across media. And
Oh,
while
neat.
you were talking, you made some comments that really were helpful for me thinking through that project. So that's just an aside. The thing that struck me most of all is when you showed those statistics and the desire for respect for one's ideas with 98%. I mean, that's astonishing. And so my question kind of follows up a little bit on that about two things you implicitly were talking about but never came out and said. And one of them is about gender and demographics. And the other one is about the economics of book clubs and why they exist. So I don't know the statistics, but my understanding, or at least my sensibility, is that the vast majority of people who participate in book clubs are women. So that's like one side. And then on the economic side, some of the reasons why book clubs are so tied into specific books, like Reese's Book Club or Oprah, is like that's how the publishers are like, we're going to guarantee you X number of copies for your book, and then like if you get picked for a book club, it's like you've made it. And sci-fi seems to fit weirdly, right? Because sci-fi is probably more historically affiliated with male readers, and maybe doesn't make it into those categories of like, these are the books the publishers are pushing out for these audiences. So I'm just curious from your experience here at Blacksburg, how the issue of the kind of gender demographics play in, and what you think about like the economics of, like you mentioned Blacksburg Books, for example, is one host. Like just how the kind of the book world fits into what happens at Blacksburg.
Well, I feel like as far as gender goes, I feel like I haven't really experienced enough sci-fi and fantasy book clubs to really define that, but I can say that the fiction book club at Blacksburg is almost entirely female, and the nonfiction, nonfiction I am not entirely sure because they're male and female readership. Having been to local sci-fi events, I can say that there's definitely a mix of genders, races, backgrounds, and I think the composition of SFF Book Club mirrors more the composition of Blacksburg. That I think the only defining characteristic is that most of the people in the room have some college or has at least one college degree. Something that I personally like, I've tried to join other genre book clubs, specifically ones that were geared towards LGBTQ communities, that I felt like I didn't quite fit in, is because the books weren't, I didn't feel like the books were going far enough, that there were a lot of feel-good stories, which I can understand. I understand why people would want to reach out for those, but if I'm going to a book club, I want something that would challenge me and also something that I would be excited about discussing with other people. And that's something else that I have tried to bring to book club. As far as the economics, not having November's book kind of broke my heart, because not everybody in the club has that disposable income that they can pick up a $20 book. We have some members who they will, like right there at the end of club, go and purchase the Kindle copy on their Kindle. And we have some people who do not mind putting on that pirate hat whatsoever to get that copy. And that I don't interfere with it. It's not as my profession, I cannot. But I'm not going to question where you got it. I'm just happy you have it. And it's why I nudge library management to get those copies even harder, because not everybody can afford it. And like, that cost shouldn't be a cost of joining a book club. Did that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I have a question for you. I was
sure.
curious about your guiding principles. First, I was curious, when did you kind of start implementing them? Did you have to start doing them over time as things came up? And how much have those guiding principles influenced, like, how people come to the space and how people interact with one another? In particular, building off of what kind of Matt was talking about, but because you also want to include, books that include authors of different race, different genders and things like that. And so, how much does including those different types of authors also influence how people come and talk in that space?
A lot of the principles developed over time. In the very beginning of book club, we didn't meet during the holidays at all, but people wanted to meet during the holidays. At the beginning, we didn't really worry about like passing the talking piece, or making sure that people didn't talk over each other because there were so few people. It's like, once we got into those numbers, it was necessary to. And also library policy, like as far as how people can use the space and treat the space and conduct within the library, is also like, other book clubs may get into shouting matches, but like, it's a library policy that you're not supposed to, and that staff are supposed to keep that in check. And it's never gotten quite that bad. I mentioned the book where people were being disrespectful. I was approached by an attendee afterwards saying that, it made me really uncomfortable that y'all were saying such things about not just the book, but also what each other were saying, which caused me to take a step back. I actually met with this person outside of book club a couple of times, and going over, like, how could we have done better? How can we do better going forward? And trying to bring in, like, I've had conflict mediation training and restorative justice training as part of Virginia Tech, and trying to bring that into it, I had a different person say that they've used that training as a part of their job, doing completely different things with it, and they weren't comfortable with me using it in a low-stakes setting such as book club, and trying to learn how to mediate a group without potentially triggering somebody. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes I have to, like, when conversation really gets heated and people get excited, like trying to talk over each other and just trying to like back it down. It's like, okay, finish this person and then this person. And just doing that act of doing that, I don't think I could have done that in 2019. I think I was too much of an introvert, and it's like, y'all do, I'm just gonna be back here and hope y'all don't do anything sideways, but just getting that confidence to, part of running the club and also part of the training, and just how far I've come along as a person like that. Also mentioned that we have a short list of the banned authors, and two that we actually added, well, I actually added to the list this year. Neil Gaiman, who, his American Gods was one of those books that I had on hand to give to people who hadn't read it, and then everything came out about the thing that he's currently in courts for, and deciding, like, no, this can't be it. And there are 2 or 3 other authors that have had several cases brought against them that there's death of the author, and then there's people who are still actively profiting off of the works that they created that I can't in good conscience. The other author was Orson Scott Card, that people wanted to read the first in one of his series, but I felt as a gay person and his stance on homophobia and gay people, like I could not in good conscience have that as a book club pick, because I didn't want people to feel like they could not come to book club if they were gay or if they were an ally and we were reading that book.
Thank you. This was a interesting talk. The whole time you were talking, I kept thinking about humanities classes as book club, and it strikes me that there's a kind of in this model, there's a kind of an enactment of a kind of critical pedagogy that you're articulating in terms of how to create a kind of a sociality or kind of community built around reading, around discussion of ideas, and so and also pointing to all of the kind of invisible work that happens behind teaching, right, behind the kind of creation of that, from scheduling, the setting in place, the kind of rules of the community, so I was just wondering, what do you think about that idea of book club as a kind of model for educational contexts? I mean, the other thing that really strikes me is a kind of flattening of hierarchy in terms of who gets to speak, whose knowledge counts, who has authority to sort of designate what's talked about and what's said. So anyway.
Oh, I feel like read what you want book clubs kind of fill that niche, especially in public school. My nephew goes to a public school in Virginia, and he just entered middle school, and they have a read what you want, and they're able to bring their favorite book and talk about it, and it's like the no talking zone where they have an official talking piece and they get to say what they want about the book, and everybody gets to respond to them, and then it passes on to the next person. And I feel like it gives kids agency to talk about what means a lot to them about this book. And with Wesley, it's Captain Underpants. But and being able to share that in a group and get like validation from your peers, oh, I like Captain Underpants too, or have you read this other thing by? And having the teacher chime in, it's like, I don't know about authority figures who are like this, and just kids having that discussion, I think gets them ready for later on in high school when they're having debates in civics class, or when they come to college and they're writing composition papers, to like spell out their ideas in a way that other people can understand them and feel like they have agency over the ideas that they're forming. I admit my knowledge basis is school libraries and public libraries. This is my first academic library job. So I could definitely see a book club happening here. There's Comunidad, the Spanish language book club that's actually hosted by one of the librarians who works at the Fralin Research Center in Roanoke. The idea of one class, one read, if you take an English class, you're all reading the same book. I guess outside of an educational space where you're just reading for pleasure, if people are on the same page reading the book, makes me think back to the person on Reddit who's like, yeah, I've finished up my classes, I've got some free time, I'm gonna sit down with other grad students, and this is what I like to read, what do you like to read? I think that skills that they just picked up in a classroom environment, like I want to do this thing, I want to do the scheduled thing, let's sit down and talk about it like adults. Let's read something that we haven't read before and do it together. And people from a bunch of different degrees and disciplines, like even in Sci-Fi and Fantasy Book Club, we have a lot of STEM people, we have arts and humanities people that are sharing what they know out of their backgrounds to like a group understanding of the. Am I answering your question at all? Okay, I figured that I'd go off into the weeds sometimes.
So Deepsika has her hand raised.
Hi, it was such a wonderful talk, and it's so exciting. It makes me want to join your book club.
Thank you.
And so much of the stuff that now I'm learning in a classroom space of STS, I believe. I'm a first year grad student here, has arrived to me through fiction, and especially science fiction. So, I just had one question, and I was curious to ask if there has been any demand about translated works in your book club. Do members ever ask to read translated science fiction? And if so, has that ever increased recently or not?
We have. We've read a couple of works that have been translated from other languages, and they're on the list that was linked to you. Like one that immediately popped to mind that Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, they wrote Roadside Picnic. They've written a couple of other books that have been on suggestion lists that ultimately didn't get chosen by the members to read that year. We're not opposed to reading translated works. The problem is finding enough copies in print and also finding them digitally. There have been books that people have recommended that I've actually found here at the Virginia Tech Library. A book of fairy tales by Carol Capek, the Czech author, I think, who coined the term robot, and like, oh, he wrote fairy tales. We've also, like the side group that bounces around titles that we should be reading, we've read a bunch of things that other people have suggested. I think the only thing that would keep us from reading a translated work would be, can the library find it? Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah,
Oh.
thank you.
So Kuliash in the chat had a question, and she says, Laura gave me a ride on that stormy night. I'm curious about what Laura's overall impression of the general direction of science fiction thinking on science and technology. Are dystopian narratives win? Do dystopian narratives win over utopian/positive stories? That resonate with what we have in that resonates with what we have in STS. How to critique science and technology, but still be hopeful about their liberatory potentials.
Well, I can say that this year's picks did trend more towards hopeful stories and humorous stories, as I think that now more than ever people are looking for an escape. Not to say that they're not in-depth stories that have topics that are this isn't to say that they're not relevant for their content, but as far as reading Canticle for Leibowitz right now, probably not. It's bleak for a long time, and then it's hopeful. We read Dan Simmons' Hyperion, that was bleak and hopeful at the very end. Somebody suggested reading The Handmaid's Tale this year, and I got emails that said, probably wouldn't attend it if it's a good book, but only once. So, yeah, no repeat reads of that this year. I personally like to read books that we can kind of see in ourselves and also the world around us, which is why I was sad that American Gods has fallen off the list, because I feel like the content to it is relevant if the author wasn't undergoing a court case right now. As trying to think of the ones that we are going to be reading this coming year, we're reading Shroud by Adrian Tchaikovsky in late summer, I believe. And that is a story of like technology going too far. And it's like, it's won too many awards for me not to, but I'm going to bracket it with some humorous fantasy fiction about worlds going pear-shaped. I'm not sure if I answered your question at all, Kulash. Definitely when we are suggesting books for book club, it's when I'm doing it, and I'm sure when other people are doing it, it's a reflection of what is going on in society at the moment, or books that they read a long time ago to see if they're still as relevant as when they are now.
Kuliash in the chat said you did. Thank you. Does anybody else have questions? There was a comment in the chat that I thought I'd share with you. Cora was just saying thank you. This was a wonderful talk. What a fantastic community you have helped build. I really like the way you described building this space and your role and your desire to bring in your various skills and how to have people walk away with what they came for. Really resonated with my own sensibilities about my role as an instructor. No commentary, or no questions, just commentary. And then Monami said completely agree, and then Fabian wanted to follow up with, I agree, I like the values behind the librarian nature that Laura mentioned, especially pointing to resources as a part of our pedagogical practice.
I appreciate it, online people, and it makes me think of when I was in grad school getting my library science degree, and I worked for a bookstore, and I was frequently at odds with the management because they wanted people to leave with something. They didn't care if they left with whatever they came in for. They wanted sales. But going to school for library science and being a librarian, I wanted people to either leave with what they came in for or a better idea on where to find what they came in for. And if it would take 4 to 6 weeks for the store to get something that they could just go across town and immediately purchase, I've only worked a non-library job for 2 years of my entire working life, and that is why. It's just in my nature to help people. Even when it's just standing at the grocery store and somebody's trying to find something, I'm like, I think what you're looking for is over here. It's like, I can't wear red shirts to Target. They think I work there. I think everybody in this room, as faculty and as educators, they want their people to find what it is they're looking for, and they want to help pathfind to get them there, not necessarily like immediately give them the correct answer, but just the tools on how to find that answer and other ones that they might be looking for.
If nobody else has any questions, we're close to time, so I think we should give Laura a round of applause and thank her for coming today.
Thank you.
And if you're here in person, feel free to help yourself to the treats. I wish I had your own capabilities to give our online people treats.
Mentioned a book. I was like, yes, I need to add this to my list.